Well, let me then, as a follow-up, ask you about diplomacy. What diplomatic moves are you prepared to make as confidence-building measures towards peace in your country?
Any diplomatic move without having stability and getting rid of the terrorists is going to be illusional, just an illusion. So any diplomatic move should start with stopping the flow of the terrorists, the logistical support of those terrorists, the armament support, and the money support. Then you have full plan. The Syrian could sit on the table, discuss the future of Syria, the political system, the constitution, the institution, everything.
Would that future include negotiations with the Syrian opposition?
Yeah, exactly. But that doesn't mean negotiating with the terrorists.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Now, but does it mean that you're ready for, let's say, a program of reconciliation with those who have opposed you? Are you ready for that?
Of course, we announced it at the beginning of this year. We said we are ready to discuss with any political party in Syria, inside Syria and outside Syria.
Let's take this down the road into next year. Would you be prepared to offer amnesty to all the Syrians who opposed your government?
They didn't breach the law. So if they oppose the government, they can come to Syria without amnesty. Only amnesty should be offered to anyone who violates the Syrian law or breach the law. I mean, if you oppose it, it's not crime. We have opposition within Syria.
But do you believe in amnesty as a path towards peace?
Yeah, that depends on to whom. If it's to whom they stain their hands with the Syrian blood, it could be as part of national reconciliation.
Would that include reparations to the families of those who were killed?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the president who should put all these details. I think the Syrian meeting of every faction or all the parties that could define all these details.
What would you say, Mr. President, to the millions of Syrians who are now refugees as you move towards a peace process? What will you do to say, please come home?
Of course, we want them to come back to their villages, to their cities, to their houses, to their homes. We want them to. But we have to help them with getting rid of the terrorists, because the majority of those refugees left because of the terrorists, not because of the government. Actually, we have refugees within Syria that's being helped by the government.
Well, let me ask you this. Have you spoken to President Obama?
Never.
Have you ever spoken to him?
Never.
Are you interested in speaking to our president?
That depends on the content. It's not a chat.
If you wanted to send him a message right now, what would you say to him?
Listen to your people. Follow the common sense of your people. That's enough.
And Pope Francis instructed the international community to lay aside the futile pursuit of a military solution. Do you believe the Pope's advice is valid for your government as well as other countries?
Of course, we invited every militant in Syria to give up its armament, and we offered amnesty to whoever lay down his armament and wants to go back to his normal life, to his normality as Syrian citizen. Of course, we believe in that.
Thank you. Now, before I give this back to my colleague, reporter Greg Palkot, I want to ask you a question that's been bothering me and perhaps other Americans. Not everyone who's watching this interview today knows that you're a doctor, you're an MD, and you've done this before you were president. As you know, doctors take an oath never to do harm to anyone. That's a direct quote from the Hippocratic Oath. Does a doctor give that up when he takes political office?
First of all, doctors take the right decision to protect the life of the patient. So you cannot say that they don't do harm physically, because sometimes they have to extract the bad member that could kill the patient. You could extract eye, you could extract leg, and so on. But you don't say that he's a bad doctor. It's still a humanitarian job, whatever they do. The same for a politician, but in a larger scale. A doctor deals with one patient, the politician should deal with the public, with millions or 10 of millions, and so on. So the question is whether your decision should help the life of the Syrians or not in such a situation. Nobody likes the violence. We are against the violence. But what will you do when the terrorists attack your country and kill the people? Would you say that I'm against violence, or you defend? You have army, you have police, they have to do their job. This is the Constitution, and this is the role of any government. What did you do in Los Angeles in the 90s when you have rebels? Didn't you send your army? You did.
Greg.
Exactly. So this is the mission of the government. The most important thing is when you take the decision, whether it harms or not, it should help the majority of the people. It's better if you take the decision that could help everyone, but sometimes in certain circumstances, in difficult circumstances, you cannot. So you have to take the less harmful decision.
Thank you, Mr. President. Greg.
Mr. President, our time is limited, but I want to briefly go back in time a little bit. I was here in 2000 for the funeral of your father. You assumed the position of president, and at that time, some people had real hopes for you as a reformer to change things, to bring more democracy to this country. In fact, however, critics and analysts said you pulled back. You pulled back to the point where now you were being branded other things than reformer. You were branded dictator and much worse. How does that make you feel? How does it make you feel when people say you, to use an American parlance, you've lost the plot? That is, you've lost the trail of what you might have done then that might have avoided all of this now.
Yeah. So first of all, if you want to talk about the hope, I always say I'm the hope of the Syrians. It doesn't matter if I'm the hope of any foreigner person, whether he's official or any other one. So all the terms that you've used in your question should be referred to the Syrian to see whether they agreed upon these terms or not. At the end, it's not about the term, it's about the content. It doesn't matter what they say, whether he's dictator or reformer. Today you have propaganda. Do they say the same word about their allies in the Gulf states? Do they talk about the dictatorship in the Gulf state?
We're talking about Syria now.
Yeah, I know, but I have the right to answer about the other regime or other states that they are much far from democracy than the Syrian state. Going back to your question, the reform is not the job of certain person in a country, whether the president or the government or the people. The president and the government can lead the reform, but the reform is a social process. It's a social process, and it's influenced by many different things, including the external factors, whether you have a war, whether you have stability, whether you have better economic conditions, whether you have very bad ideologies coming from abroad. So talking about the reform in the way that I presented at the very beginning, and I still believe in the same concept and values and principles, you should have democracy that reflects our own traditions. But democracy is not a goal, it's a means to reach the prosperity. And democracy based on accepting the other. When you have a closed ideology and many taboos that prevent you from accepting the other cultures in your country, you are going backward. Doesn't matter what the president do in that regard. Not the constitution, not the law, not any other process can make the democracy real one, realistic one in such a society. Only when the society makes this democracy, you can talk about it. It's a culture. So I'm still a reformer. I still believe in these same values. But if you go back to the history of the last decades, the most complicated situations happening in our region, this is one of the reasons why the democracy, not in Syria, in the whole region, is going backward. We are going farther from democracy, not closer.
But again, to stay with your country and to stay with a little bit of recent history,
yeah.
Move back just 2.5 years ago this week. That was the first protests here in this country. Yeah. People said that was still a sign that people were unhappy, your own Syrian people, about your moves to democracy, and that was simply what they were asking for: more democracy, more reform. They weren't even asking for you to step down at that time.
Right.
Critics will say you moved in too hard, too fast, with tanks, targeting protesters, torturing, et cetera, et cetera. That is the critique of yours, and you once again missed another chance. Yeah. How do you feel about that 2.5 years on?
That's a very simple question. If you want to oppress those people because we don't accept their request, why did the president himself, I said in one of my speeches at the very beginning of the conflict, why did I have to say publicly that those people have legitimate demand? This is first. Second, if we are going to use the force, why did we change the constitution? Why did you change the law? Why did you have now more than 15 new parties in Syria, political party? Why did you change so many laws that they asked for? Because we knew that it wasn't about democracy. If they asked for democracy, how did they kill some of those people? I'm not talking about, I'm not generalizing. Some demonstrators demonstrated for the reason that you've mentioned, but some others, they killed soldiers and they killed policemen in the first week of the conflict. What's the relation between asking for democracy and killing and assassinating? So we have to be very precise in differentiating between people who ask for democracy and terrorists. This is first. Second, part of those people who were opposing the government at the very beginning, today they support the government against the terrorists, because they ask for reform, but they didn't ask for terrorists. So you are talking about two different completely situations between the beginning of the conflict and today. So we're still moving forward in the path of the democracy. And part of the solution that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, when we sit around the table, the Syrian people will say, what's the best constitution? What's the best political system? Do they want it parliamentarian, presidential, quasi-presidential, and so on? So what laws do they want? Everything. So it's not the president who's going to set. If the people want to set up their new system, this is democracy.
But you bring up a point that leads to my next question. Some people will say that you have just waged a war of attrition. That is, that you have waited and ground people down. And some of those that felt very peacefully that they wanted a change here in democracy, now after 2.5 years of fighting, they're willing to give in a little bit. And at the outset, you talked about terrorists coming inside, and now you've allowed, or you've created a situation on the ground because of this long period for the terrorists to come here. My point is, you're not really changing people's minds, you're just forcing them into this box where we're 2.5 years on, we're 110,000 people dead, cities in ruins, and you're hoping that your people will just surrender to the idea. I mean, is that really where you wanted to go with this whole thing?
So the core of the idea that I created the atmosphere to invite terrorists to Syria.
You held on long enough. You held on long enough against the demands of people who wanted peaceful demands.
No, from the very beginning we accepted the demands. From the very beginning
you accepted the demands.
From the very beginning, before the terrorists or those foreigners coming to Syria, from the very beginning, in 2011, 2 months after 6 days after the conflict, we said we're going to change, and we started the process of changing the constitution 2 or 3 months after the beginning, and we had the vote. I mean, the people. I didn't change the constitution. The people voted, or let's say there was a referendum, and the people voted in that referendum for this new constitution. At the beginning of 2012, in February, before the end of 1 year of the conflict. So what you're saying is far cry from reality. It's completely different story. It's not none of these things happening in Syria. It's about maybe another country. What happened in Syria from the very beginning, we said we are ready. If there's any demand, we are ready to change everything. So what could the president do, or how could he succeed if the people are against him? How can he succeed? Just you want to be president just for the sake of being president? That's not realistic. It's impossible.
Do your tactics in this war, do you back your tactics in this war? I mean, a year ago we stood in Homs, one of your great cities, and we watched as your artillery, which was lined up around the outskirts of the city, pound again and again, relentlessly, the center of the city. You say you're going for the enemy, you say you're going for the terrorists, but that, some will call it indiscriminate shelling, has left many civilians dead, and frankly has left that city and many of your other great cities like Aleppo and others in ruins. I mean, is this the way to go after, if you think there are some terrorists out there, the terrorist enemies of your state?
So it's like if you say that when the terrorists infiltrated some area or attack certain part of any city, that the civilians would stay and live with them. That's impossible. Whenever the terrorists enter an area, the civilians would leave, unless they use them as a human shield. But in most of the cases, the civilians would quit their area because of the terrorists. And that's why you have so many refugees. So in most of the cases, the Syrian army attack area where there's no civilians living in it. In most of the cases, you can hardly find civilians with terrorists. They cannot live.
With a rough estimate, Mr. President, of the total of 110,000 dead so far is at least about 50,000 civilians. You're saying there were 50,000 human shields? You're saying that those people were in the wrong place?
First of all, what's the source of your information?
That is a breakdown by analysts who look at these numbers. You think it's lower?
Analysts from the United States, living in the United States or living around, you can only talk about facts. We cannot talk about estimations and allegations.
110,000 is a fact that everyone agrees with.
Of course, as I said, we have tens of thousands of dead. I didn't say the exact number for one reason, because we have thousands of missing people. You cannot count them as dead. Did you know that they are dead? It's a war now. So talking about the number, we have to be very precise. You're talking about the numbers as a spreadsheet without knowing that they are family. This is tragedy. We live with those people. This is a human tragedy. It's not about numbers. It's about every family in Syria lost a dear one, including my family. We lost a member of family, we lost friends, and that's why we are fighting terrorism. So should we allow the terrorists to continue without fighting them? This number, if it's close to the real number, will be so many folds, will be millions, not hundreds of thousands.
We don't want to get lost in numbers because, as you say, it's very true, a human issue here. But again, you use the figure of 90% of the opposition, the rebels, are Al-Qaeda. You stand by that, 90%.
80 to 90, no one has exact number. You don't have the exact number because they are coming, flowing irregularly.
You don't think that's too high? I mean, people are putting that lower, at least 50-50, and one would say that if at least it's 50-50, you have some opposition to deal with.
Which people? I'm sure not the Syrian people. No one in Syria say they are 50-50. From abroad, maybe. They have their own estimations. But at the end, it's our conflict. We live here. It's our country. We can tell how much. But 50-50, how did they count it?
But again, just to sum up what you've been saying, in one quote you said, the opposition has been manufactured from abroad. Do you really feel that? You really feel the opposition in this country to your government has been manufactured from abroad?
It's not feeling, and it's not about how I feel. It's about what facts are presented in front of us. If they don't have Syrian grassroots, because we have oppositions in Syria that they have grassroots. Why to have opposition abroad? How do they live? Who give them money? How they are financed? And we all know that they belong to some to the United States and Britain and France and Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Real opposition only belongs to the Syrian people. As long as it doesn't belong to its people, it's made by other countries. That's simple evidence.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dennis?
I just in listening to this exchange that you've had with Greg Palkot, there's one thing I want to be really sure about.
Yeah.
Are you minimizing the deaths by saying, well, you know, it's not 50,000, it's 40,000 or 30,000?
No,
are you minimizing?
We cannot minimize it because in every house you have pain today. In every house you have sadness. You cannot minimize whether this number or higher number. It's a tragedy. We live in Syria. It's a killing. But we have to talk about the reasons. Who killed those? Not the government. The terrorists. We are defending our country. If we don't defend, this number will be manifold. That's what I meant.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Now, looking at a broader picture here, this is a watershed moment. It appears to be a watershed moment that, for the world, from here in war-torn Syria, a new roadmap towards world peace may be developing by starting with you relinquishing your chemical weapons and then moving forward with a concrete plan for peace in Syria. Do you think that we are at that kind of a moment?
You're talking about the situation within Syria. There's no direct relation between the chemical issue and the conflict within Syria. It's completely different. So if we want to move toward a political solution, we can, but that's not related to the chemical agreement.
I understand, but the fact that this chemical issue has brought the world together to finally pay attention. Yes. Is this a moment you can build from?
That depends to a large extent to the countries that are supporting the terrorists in Syria.
Before I go back to Greg, there are a lot of countries now involved in this process.
Yeah.
Not just the U.S. and Russia, but Iran, Israel, Turkey, and even China. So much depends on serious cooperation with the Geneva process. Are you prepared to make sure that this opportunity doesn't fall apart?
We supported Geneva process from the very beginning, and we cooperated with the UN envoys that came to Syria. Actually, the one who put obstacles, not Syria, neither Russia or China, it was the United States, for many different reasons. One of the main reasons that they know that they don't have real oppositions abroad. They know this. This is one of their main problems, because the core of Geneva conference is to be based on the will of the Syrian people. So whatever we agreed in Geneva, upon in Geneva, is going to be proposed to the Syrian people. And if you don't have grassroots, you cannot convince the Syrian people to move with you. This is the American problem with their puppets, to be very clear and very frank.
Thank you, Mr. President. Greg?
And following up on that, Dennis and Mr. President, others think indeed that in fact there is a way forward here, that you are for the first time in this last 2.5 years speaking seriously to the international community about a negotiating track, granted just a narrow track of chemical weapons. And in fact, there could be the possibility of longer range talks. Could you be a part of that? Or if your strong allies and basically the sponsor of this new wave of discussions, of negotiations, Russia, feels that perhaps it would be more helpful not to have you in the position, what would be your stand? Are you in this to the end, or if it's more, if it would facilitate things for you to step aside and for the good of your country, would you do that as well?
Being here or not being here in that position as president should be defined and decided by the Syrian people and by the ballot box. No one else, whether friend or opponents or enemy or any other one, have a word in that issue. If the Syrian people want you to be president, you have to stay. If they don't want you have to quit right away, with the conference or without conference. That's self-evident. We don't discuss it, and I said it many times. So no one has to say that, and the Russians never try to interfere in the Syrian matters. There's mutual respect between Syria and Russia, and they never try to involve themselves in those Syrian details. Only the American administration and their allies in Europe and some of the puppets in the Arab world repeat these words, whether the president should leave, what the Syrian people should do, what kind of government. Only this bloc interfere in the matter of sovereign country.
I know you said that there are elections scheduled here at least in 2014.
Exactly.
You would stand for those, and you would see if the people would decide for or against you, and those could be conducted in this current atmosphere?
You have to probe the mood of the people and the will and the desire of the people at that time to see whether they want to run for presidency or not. If they don't feel that they are positive, you don't run. So it's too early now, because you have something new every day. It's too early to talk about it. Before the election, I can take my decision.
Dennis?
Mr. President, according to the New York Times, President Obama has said the greater goal with respect to Syria is to curb chemical weapons use and proliferation of chemical weapons worldwide. Do you believe this could be a chance to reset Syria's relations with the United States?
That depends on the credibility of the administration, any administration. And that depends on the U.S. administration's.
But you're not saying our president doesn't have credibility. I'm asking you if this is an opportunity for you to reset relations with the United States.
As I said, the relation depends on the credibility of the administration. We never looked at the United States as enemy. We never looked at the American people as enemy. We always like to have good relations with every country in the world. First of all, the United States, because it's the greatest country in the world. That's normal, that's self-evident. But that doesn't mean to say and to go in the direction that the United States want us to go in. We have our interest, we have our civilization, we have our will, and they have to accept and to respect that. If there's mutual respect, we don't have problem. We want to have good relation, of course.
Let me ask you some specifics with respect to going forward.
Yeah.
Are you going to work towards a new constitution for Syria and guarantee more freedom for the people of Syria? Will you work towards that?
Our constitution today guarantees more freedom, but that depends on the content of the freedom. That's what the Syrian parties could discuss on the table. It's not the constitution of the president. It's not my vision or my own project. It should be a national project. So the Syrians should define exactly what they want, and I have to accept whatever they want.
Well, for example, what do you think of free elections?
Of course, we have free elections now in this constitution.
Really?
Now we're going to have free elections next year, in May 2014.
Is there anyone else who could be president of Syria?
Of course, anyone who wants to be now, he can be.
So you're not the only person who could preside over Syria?
No, I won't be the only. I won't be the only person.
And so you believe it's possible for Syria to have a peaceful transition without you in power? That is possible.
What do you mean by transition? Transition of what?
A transition
of
towards
what?
A resolution of the conflict and the war. Is that possible with you not being in power, or do we have to end the war and then?
If the Syrian people want me not to be in transitional or permanent or natural or normal situation, this means it's going to be peaceful. Anything people doesn't want, it cannot be peaceful.
Let's look 5 years into the future.
Yeah.
What will Syria look like?
We have so many challenges. If we get rid of this conflict, of course, the shorter one is to get rid of the terrorists, as I said. But the most important thing, their ideology. We have no doubt that the existence of terrorists from all over the world, extremist terrorists, have left so many side effects within the hearts and minds, at least of the young people in Syria. What would you expect from a child who tried to behead somebody with his hand? What would you expect from children that's been watching, beheading, and barbecuing heads, and watching cannibals in Syria on the TV and on the internet? I'm sure that it has a lot of psychological side effect and bad effects on the society. So we have to rehabilitate this generation to be open again as Syria used to be. Of course, I'm talking now about local focal, but if we leave it, it's going to be like a ripple in the water that expands into the society. This is first. Second, we have to rebuild our infrastructure that has been destroyed recently, to rebuild our economy. And, as I said, to have a new system that suits the Syrian people, new political system and economic system, and any other accessories regarding to these main headlines.
Greg?
Mr. President, as a reporter, I can just tell you what I see, and I've traveled around the country. I've seen this crisis go on. Right now, looking as you do at your country, with maybe 60 to 70% of your territory out of your control, maybe 40% of your population out of your control, 6 million people displaced, almost a third of your country has been displaced by this war. We've talked about the death tolls, we haven't even mentioned those who are injured. Do you see any way back? Do you see any way that the people could again be behind you in a totality? Do you see anything that you could do at this point to make up for this 2.5 years of hard, bloody, grinding war which this country has been put through?
Today, after the majority of the people experienced what the meaning of terrorism, I'm talking about a country that used to be one of the safest in the world. We used to be number 4 in safety on the international scale. We were number 4. To try to experience directly the extremism and the terrorism, those people wanted now they are supporting the government. So they are behind the government. Doesn't matter if they are behind me. The most important thing is to be behind the institution. So the majority is. Regarding the percentage that you put, of course it's not correct, the percentage. But anyway, the army and the police don't exist anywhere in Syria. And the problem now is not a war between 2 countries and 2 armies that you say, I took that land and I liberated the other land and so on. It's about the infiltration of the terrorism. Even if we liberate or get rid of terrorists in certain area, they'll go to another area and destroy and kill and behead and do their routine. The problem now is the infiltration of those terrorists to Syria, and the most dangerous problem that we are facing, their ideology. This is more important than how much percent we have and how much percent they have. At the end, a large number of them are foreigners, they're not Syrians. They will leave someday, or they will be dead inside Syria. But it's about the ideology that they're going to leave. This is the worry of Syria and the neighboring country, and this should be the worry of any country in the world, including the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dennis.
Mr. President, thank you for this interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to Syria.